Whoops. Hey, welcome to lesson 4.3, side, 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 and side angle side. Our objective is for the student to be able to prove two triangles are congruent using side, 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 or side, angle, side. And yes, that's what those S's stand for, sides and angles. Now, excuse me for a second while I talk about cats. And I know what you're thinking, why is this guy talking about cats again? Why is he always talking about cats? I'm sick of it. Give me a minute. I have a point. Now, I'm trying to prove that these two pictures are cats. Now, on this one, I think this is obviously a cat, but I need some evidence to prove it, right? I can't just say it is a cat because it's missing a lot of information here. It's like missing eyes and a nose, and it's not like a very accurate drawing. It's just like an outline of cat. But still, I think I can prove that this is a cat. So I'm going to list some things that I see that are cat-like. One, it has cat ears, right? Which is like a dead giveaway that it's a cat. Two, it has whiskers, right? And three, it has a tail. And because it has cat ears, a whisker, and a tail, it's a pretty strong argument that this is definitely a cat. Even though I can't see the fur or its face or like, you know, that it's eating a mouse, it's definitely a cat. And this is a cat. Okay? I know this is a cat. Now this one, it's also missing a lot to its drawing, right? Once again, I can't see the face. In fact, I can't see the whole top half of it. And all I see is that this is a tail. Right? It has a tail, it has like two hind legs, and I don't know, it has small feet. Yeah, small feet. Now, is this enough information to prove that these two are... Now, can I prove that this is a cat? Do I know that this isn't a squirrel, or let's say a dog, or like a rabbit, or like a raccoon, or like a funny looking, like Tasmanian devil? Okay, it's not a Tasmanian devil. But no, this doesn't give me enough information that it's a cat. Whereas this does, you know, there's some pieces of information that prove that it's a cat. And why am I talking about this? Well, my point is, in both of these pictures, I don't have all the information. It's not a full picture of a cat. But yet, with some vital piece of information, I can prove something's a cat. But sometimes there's not enough information to prove it's a cat, even though I don't see all the pieces of the cat. What am I talking about? Well, think of triangles, okay? Last time we were talking about triangles, and I said that you need 3 congruent angles and 3 congruent sides to prove that 2 triangles are congruent. But sometimes you don't have to have all that information to prove that they're congruent triangles. Sometimes you just need some of the information. And we're going to talk about 5 different ways over the course of 3 next lessons to prove that 2 triangles are congruent just using 3 pieces of information, all right? And what we're going to start off with is this: side, side, side congruence. And that is basically this: if all 3 sides are congruent in 2 triangles, right? So both of these triangles have 3 sides that are congruent, then the triangles are congruent. I don't have to show that all 3 angles are also congruent, because I know that if 3 sides are congruent, then definitely these 2 triangles are congruent. It's a fact, okay? And if you really want to take the time, try to take 3 triangles, try to make 2 different triangles with 3 sides that are the same length with different angle measurements. And it's impossible. If 2 triangles have 3 congruent sides, then they're congruent. So this one has this side that's congruent, it has this side that's congruent to each other, and this side that's congruent to each other. And that is enough to prove that these 2 triangles are congruent. So let's just see if we can prove that these triangles are congruent. 1. I want to see if these two, are these 2 pairs of triangles congruent? And if so, let's write a congruent statement. So let's look at this one. I have triangle YZX, all right, and MNO. And do I know that these 2 triangles are congruent? Well, is there 3 congruent sides? Well, ZY is congruent to MN, ZX is congruent to NO, and XY is congruent to MN, right? Because they both have the 3. So if there's 3 congruent sides, yes, they are congruent, and so I could say that these 2 triangles, triangle YZX is congruent to triangle MNO. And don't forget the little triangle symbols to say the triangles. So these 2 triangles are congruent, and keep in mind, you have to write these in the right order. YZ, you see here, is congruent to MN. So the order that you write these in is matters. Remember that from last lesson? You do have to write them in the right order. So YZX is the same as MNO. Those 2 are congruent. And because of what? Well, I showed that the three sides are congruent. So we'd say side, side, side. That is the proof right there. Three sides are congruent. Now let's look at these two triangles. I see that FA is congruent to PT, and I see that FS is congruent to HT. Is that enough information to prove that these two triangles are congruent? Well, you might think that AS and PH look about the same, but there's no congruent marks. So I can't just assume that they're congruent because one's just a little bit bigger. So this only has two triangles, two sides that are the same. You need three. So in this case, I cannot prove that they're congruent because it only has two congruent sides. And I would say the reason I can't prove it is because not enough info. All right? It doesn't mean they're not congruent, but I don't have enough information to prove that they are. All right, moving on. Another way I could prove triangles are congruent is called side angle side congruence. And if two sides are congruent, all right, I have two congruent sides in triangles with a congruent angle in between the two sides, then the triangles are congruent. And let's look at this picture. It's really important to understand the order that this is in. This is side angle side, meaning I have two sides with an angle in the middle that's congruent. Two congruent sides in both of these and an angle in between those two sides. So that's why it's side, then an angle, then a side. Side, angle, side. You see how the angle is sandwiched between the two sides? That's how I know they're congruent. So if I could show that I have side angle side and side angle side in two triangles, then they are congruent. So can I prove that either of these two triangles are congruent? Let's look at this one. Well, let's see. I have a side that's congruent to this side. I have another side that's congruent to this side. And there's an angle in between these two congruent sides that's congruent. So this would be called side angle side, right? So yes, these two triangles are congruent because of side angle side. Side angle side. And I can't clarify this enough because I know people struggle with this. The angle has to be between the two sides. All right? It's like an alligator mouth. Right? You have to have the middle of the mouth and the two sides, or else it's not side angle side. So let's take a look at this angle. I mean, these two triangles. Can I prove that these two triangles are congruent? Well, if I look at this one, I have side and a side, right? I have two angles that are congruent, and I have a side that's congruent. So yes, I have a side, an angle, and a side that's congruent in both of these. But the problem is the angle isn't in the same place. Now, if you look at this, this is side angle side. The angle is in the middle, right? So this is in between the two sides, right? But if I look at this one, this angle is not between these two sides, right? That would be right here. That would have to be right here to be in between. This one is not in between, all right? Not in the middle. In the middle. And since it's not in the middle, I can't prove side angle side because I don't have side angle side for both of these triangles. So this would be no, because not enough info. If I knew this, then they would be congruent, but since I don't, there's not enough information to prove that they're congruent. All right, let's get a little more tricky on this. Are these pairs of triangles congruent? If so, let's write the congruent statement and how I know that they're congruent. So let's look at this. Well, in this case, I have two sides and an angle in between, and two sides with an angle in between the two sides. And look, I have this side, AB is congruent to NO, CB is congruent to MO, and angle B is congruent to angle O. All right? Now, also, is this in the side angle side order? Is this an angle in between two sides? And yes, if you look over here, this is in between, right? And this is also in between the two sides, in between. So that is enough to prove that these two triangles are congruent. It's a side angle side and side angle side. So I can write my congruent statement. So triangle CBA is congruent to triangle, has to be in the same order. CB is congruent to MO, MON, because side angle side. And that's how I prove that these are congruent. I have side, angle, side congruence. Now let's look at these two. Well, in this case, I have a side, right? I have two sides that are congruent. CB is congruent to FE. I have AB congruent to ED. And then I have angle B congruent to angle F. But if you look at this one, the angle is in between, right? The two sides. But in this one, the angle is not in between the two sides. It's over to the left, right? It's not in between these two sides. So these two would not be considered congruent, right? So no, I would just cross this out because not enough info. You know, so I'm just saying I can't prove it. I cannot prove it. They could be, but I don't have enough information to prove it. Just like, to go back to the cat, this might very well be a cat, but I don't have enough information to prove to you that it's a cat. It could be a dog, or a raccoon, or a squirrel. And just like in this case, these might be congruent, but they also might not be. All right. Now we want to, these questions are asking this. What additional information is needed to prove that the triangles below are congruent using side, side, side? Well, let's look. In this first case, I want to prove ABC is congruent to DEF, and they both have two congruent sides. Now, to prove side, 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 they need to have three congruent sides. So in both cases, they're missing this third side right here, and the missing information is that BC needs to be congruent to EF, and that would prove side, 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 three congruent sides. In this case, I have two congruent sides again, but I need another congruent side, and it'd be this side, HK and MM. And so if HK was congruent to MN, then I know that these two triangles are congruent. This is the missing piece of information to prove that they're congruent. In this case, well, my two triangles are ABD, and that's this guy right here, ABD. I want to prove that this triangle is congruent to CBD, and that's this triangle right here, CBD. Well, in both of them, I have two congruent sides. This side's congruent to this side, and this side's congruent to this side. Now I need another side, and that's this side, the side that they share. All right? So I would say in this case, BD is congruent to, well, BD. It's the same side, right? They both have side BD in their triangles. And just for future reference, we'll come back to this, but this is called the reflexive property. And the reflexive property is just that something is equal to itself. So 5 is equal to 5 is the reflexive property, or BD is congruent to BD. And finally, I want to prove, now take out your highlighters for this because it might help you out a little bit. I want to prove that BEC, this triangle, is congruent to AED. All right, those are my two triangles. Well, in this case, I have two sides that are congruent. I have AD is congruent to BC, and I have AE is congruent to EC. The final piece of information I need is this third side. I need BE to be congruent to ED. So if BE is congruent to ED, then these two triangles, BEC and AED, are therefore congruent. All right, we're going to do the same thing, but we want to know what extra information is needed to prove that triangles below are congruent using side, angle, side. So just to remind you, the angle has to be between the two sides, okay? So in this case, I want to prove RPO is congruent to QTS, and I have two congruent sides, but I'm missing the angle. So for it to be side, angle, side, I need to put the angle in between. Now feel free to move ahead and do this by yourself, but if you want to watch, by all means, that's why I'm here. So in this case, I would need to know that angle R is congruent to angle Q to prove that these two are congruent using side, angle, side. Now in this case, I have a side that's congruent and an angle that's congruent, but I need another side for it to be side, angle, side. So look at this. I need the angle to be between the two sides, and for that to happen, I'd have to choose this side, and this side. That would make the angle between the two sides. So I would need to know that XY is congruent to UW to prove that these two triangles are congruent using side, angle, side. In this case, triangle ABE and DCE. All right, these are the two triangles I'm trying to prove are congruent. Let me just outline them for you. ABE E, all right, and DCE. Oh, DCE, all right. Now what's already given is that we know that we have one angle that's the same in both of them, and I know I have one side that's the same. But I wanted to prove that these two triangles are congruent using side angle side. And what I'd need for that is that BE would have to be congruent to EC. All right? And sometimes it's easier just to mark, sorry, let me just erase a little bit. It's easier just to mark it if that helps. So I want this to be congruent to this, side angle side, side angle side, and then just write your congruent statement. BE is congruent to EC. And that would make these congruent using side angle side. Now finally, once again, take out your highlighters. I want to prove that MYH, this triangle is congruent to AYT using side angle side. Now if we look at both these triangles, on this triangle I have one side that's the same on both of them and another side that's the same. And now I need an angle that's the same. Now the angle has to be between the two sides, and that would be right here. Oh, can't see that color? That would be right here in the middle. So this angle MYH has to be congruent to this angle, AYT. Must be congruent to AYT. To prove that these two triangles are congruent using side angle side. And that's it. That's basically all you need to know. Now, I'll just give you a tip when you're doing this. Remember, it's easier to mark and then mark the sides that need to be congruent and then put that information in. Well, someone's knocking at the door, so that means I have to go. So remember, don't run with scissors, don't lick a razor, and remember that people are good and help them out.